Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ102, Introduction to Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Online. Tonight's lecture is going to cover Chapter 4, where the subject will be today's police and police agency, an overview. And just to add a little more information, I'm not going to be able to cover all of the subject matter that's listed in Chapter 4, so please do me a favor and read your textbook to help add some context again to tonight's lecture. And don't forget about the key terms that are located in the front of each chapter and also the discussion questions which are located at the back of each chapter. I'm going to skip past the learning objectives for sake of time, and now we're going to kind of jump right into it. So, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. Does anybody have, excuse me, an idea on who said that? And of course, I know you can't communicate directly with me, but in your mind you can think about it. Well, that is a portion of the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, and that is truly part of contemporary law enforcement, and we're going to look more at that document in a few minutes. Now, I've got a couple links in here for a reason, and this is to square away, and yes, I'm going to use you to do this, a little bit of a, I wouldn't call it a rift, but a competition between friendly police chiefs, myself and the police chief from the city of Chino Police Department, who is a wonderful individual. These are two recruitment videos. One will be from the Chino Police Department, the other will be from the Rialto Police Department. And what I would like you to do is watch the two videos and tell me which one's better. And you can email me on that, you can Twitter me on that, you can do whatever, but I really want an honest opinion because I think mine's better, but we'll see. And again, she is a wonderful friend of mine, but a little friendly competition is always good for everybody. And when you talk about, today's police agency, and kind of an overview of it, recruiting is a really big deal. And we'll talk in a couple of chapters down the road about becoming a law enforcement officer and recruitment, but this is a big thing to draw individuals into your organization, so it's a showing of the things that you have going on and what might attract those to your particular police department. So back in the day, this is kind of what it looked like. And don't laugh, but I'm old, and maybe you're not. And when you look at police vehicles back in the day, we can start off with things like this, some old LAPD and sheriff cars, and you can see that they're the old Fords and Dodges and Chevys even, and the radio systems that are inside of them are truly old and antiquated, but that's kind of what we had to deal with back then. And now we have very contemporary vehicles, because even in law enforcement, we're looking for not just roominess and speed and handling and cornering. We're looking for a bit of economics. Do we have an economical vehicle? And what's the gas mileage, and can people fit in it, and is it safe, and can it corner, and yeah, does it look cool too? So sure. So we have these new vehicles, and some of you may have seen them on the road. They're a little smaller. We also have larger vehicles that are out there now, and these SUVs are becoming very, very popular in contemporary policing, and the office area inside of them, compared to what you saw with the picture with the old radio and Unitrol, you've got a whole computerized bunch of hoopla in there, and everything from where you can type reports and run driver's licenses and send pictures through email, and even some of the old things. So I'm going to kind of show you down here, like a cup holder. because you got to have that. Where are you going to put your coffee or your soda, right? Uh, but I mean, so this is kind of what your office looks like now compared to then. So I thought that was kind of cool to take a walk down memory lane. So today's police and police agencies face truly unprecedented challenges. Citizens and politicians are clamoring for a re-examination of the police role in our society. And it really is important that the police and the people they protect and serve agree on what should the nature of law enforcement's role be. What should we actually be doing? And to some extent, maybe even how should we be doing it? So again, this is kind of a challenge as we're coming out of the gate here. And when we look at the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, that we just read a small piece of it, but again, it says here, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder. Okay, well, that sounds pretty simple. As a law enforcement officer, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to serve the community. And yes, I'm going to protect people from stealing your TV and protect the innocent against those other non-innocent folks out there, those criminals, and defend the weak against those who prey upon them, etc. But the part that I underlined makes the job quite a bit more interesting and quite a bit more difficult. So listen, and to respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. Now, that might add a couple extra, that might be harder into the conversation that we're having this evening, because that's not always that simple. The respect the constitutional rights of everybody. You mean even those dirtbags out there, I have to respect their constitutional rights? Even those people that shot at me and tried to hurt me, or those that I know have already committed a really heinous crime, and I have to protect and respect their constitutional rights? Well, yeah, you do, and that's what makes the job not for everybody. Now, we're not going to look at the whole thing, but it's not a bad idea that you read this, because this is what you're going to have to live by when we're talking about the Code of Ethics. As a law officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind. Okay, we've gone through all that part. So now we're going to go to paragraph 2. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all. Okay. Maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule. I mean, I have to put up with those people that ridicule me. Develop self-restraint and be consistently mindful of the welfare of others, honest in thought and deed in both my personal and official life. I will be exemplary in obeying the laws of the land and the regulations of my department. Whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature or that is confided to me in official capacity will be kept ever secret unless revelation is necessary in the performance of my duty. I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, animosities, or friendships influence my decision. How many of you out there can do that? With no compromise for crime and with relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately, without fear or favor, malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary force or violence, and never accepting gratuities. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of the police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God to my chosen profession, law enforcement. Now, when you read this, and this is where I'm going to kind of amp up a little bit, you tell me that somebody getting into this business does it because of something other than wanting to serve those, to protect those, to enforce the laws. Because you don't get into law enforcement knowing that you have to compete and live up to this document that I just read to you. So people don't get into policing to be bad. People get into policing to be good. Now, does that mean that all the time they're good? No, it certainly does not. And I can say before you that I know people that shouldn't be in law enforcement, and as a matter of fact, I've fired some as my time as a police chief. But 99.99% of them are in this business for this document. And not everybody can do this job. Not everybody wants to do this job. And not everybody can qualify to do this job. So now I'm going to climb back down off the mountain for a minute, and we'll kind of move forward. But this is important for you to know, specifically as it relates to today's policing agency and some of the things that are going on. And here's an example. Eric Garner was a 43-year-old African-American father of 6 who lived in Staten Island, New York, and had quit his job for health reasons. He had dozens of arrests and was known to the New York Police Department. On July 17th, 2014, Garner was standing on the sidewalk out in front of a store when he was approached by officers who suspected him of selling cigarettes illegally. When the officers attempted to arrest him, he resisted. A chokehold was used by the officers to take Garner to the ground, and once on the ground, you could hear him say, "I can't breathe." After being handcuffed, he was on the ground and in fact breathing. He was transported to a hospital. However, he died while he was en route. And if you want to watch the video, I have a photo here and a link. And this is one of those occasions where I'm not going to play on either side of the fence here for any of you that are in this class tonight. I'm going to simply let you watch this. But I ask, as you watch some of the videos that I post, and we learn from things in policing, just like in any other career, when people don't do things really the way they're supposed to, the rest of us in law enforcement learn about how to do things better and try to improve. But I'll let you be the judge, and you can watch this case and we can talk about it later. But this is the fact of life now. And a lot of times, specifically now in today's policing and policing agency, there are a lot of challenges, like the challenge that you see before here when you watch this video. How would you handle something like this? What could have been done better? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? And how do we start to deal with new things like huge issues in recidivism and prisoners coming out into the communities, and the mentally ill, and the rise of people that need help, and all of the police shootings and all the other stuff that's kind of going on. So just think about those things as we kind of go through. Now, less than a month later, on August 9th, 2014, 18-year-old African-American Michael Brown was fatally shot by Darren Wilson, a 28-year-old white Ferguson, Missouri police officer, in what is described as a case of self-defense. And this incident was a flashpoint sparking a national backlash against police officers. And the assertion that policing practices have changed in the wake of this shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, where police officers are backing off proactive policing and not getting out of their cars as often, which has basically emboldened criminals and fueled other social unrest, which in turn has led to a spike in crime. And they're calling this thing the Ferguson effect. And I mean, to be honest, yes, there are a rash of police shootings going on, and some of them have been way more than justified, and some of them have not, to be quite honest. And things could have definitely been done a lot better. But with that, these are some of the challenges that are facing today's policing agency, like I talked about earlier, mentally ill individuals and ex-felons and the access to firearms and all of these things that we have to do, still operating within that first document that I showed you. So here we go. Let's jump into kind of the meat of what we're talking about, and get into police authority. Well, police have the right to direct and command. And the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution reserves police power for the state and local governments. And these governments must adhere to the principles of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, as well as state and federal laws. And this right comes from the people through their laws and institutions, and police are part of the state and federal criminal justice system, which, though the court determines society's course in determining lawbreakers and rehabilitating offenders. And law enforcement is a highly visible representative of local government whose officers are on duty 24/7. And consequently, people often call the police for services that are specifically not, let's say, police-related matters, or things that maybe police normally don't perform. And so a question would be, why does modern society need the police? Well, what if your neighbor's barking dog keeps you awake all night? And after you spoke to the owner, nothing's happened. Well, you can sue him. You can, that might take a while. You can shoot the dog, but that could cause other problems. So society kind of gives you another option, and the other option would be law enforcement. That could be the other option. Call the police; they'll be there. I can tell you that I've heard information from our dispatchers when I was in law enforcement, where if the electricity goes out in somebody's house, people call the police, because we have the ability to do things right away and take action, and they think that we have the answers to a lot of different things. So we do more than I think what people actually think we do. So the police role comes into play because in our society, police have the authority to do something and to do it right now. And that something may involve coercive force, meaning that we have to get people to comply. So in sum, the role of the police is to address all sorts of human problems insofar as their solutions do or may possibly require the use of force at the point of their occurrence. Now, the police can demand conformity to society's laws and expectations, and I think that that's one reason that people do call law enforcement, because we tend to be able to handle things right away. Now, today's police officers must really be generalists with a working knowledge of federal, state, county, and municipal laws, because there's just so much going on. And about 90% of the officer's time is spent doing a variety of functions other than what you see on TV, like crime fighting. And so I mean, I think a lot of people don't really realize that, but approximately 90% of a police officer's time is spent basically in a social service function. Now, media portrayal of police undoubtedly plays a part in forming, this image of crime fighting, and that image has kind of remained remarkably consistent for over 40 years probably. But it can't be overemphasized enough that there's more to law enforcement than meets the eye. Now, today's local police officers, again, must be generalists with a working knowledge of a lot of different things, and they also must be aware of human factors and understanding the psychological and sociological implications of their work. They must deal with citizens, rich and poor and young and old, in ways that maintain the community's support and confidence. And policing and partnering with this greatly diverse citizenship is no small challenge or responsibility. So when you talk about policing, we kind of need to figure out, what do we do at the end of the day? What are they? Well, there's kind of two functions there. There's crime fighter, and there is preservers of the peace. And how do we do both of those? Because citizens have such a great influence on the goals of policing within the community, we also have to understand that the goals of different police agencies vary. So with that being said, traditionally, however, there are 5 basic functions that have been established when it comes to law enforcement historically. And most police agencies do this. So the first one is enforce laws. And this is becoming extremely complicated. The designation of law enforcement agency underscores the central importance of this long accepted function. Historically, enforcing laws has been a prime task of policing, but it's become very complex now. And unfortunately, because police are the component of the criminal justice system that is in the closest contact with the public, the police are often blamed by the public for failures of the entire judicial system. So, for example, if an assault victim whose attacker is found not guilty in court, they may feel some type of resentment towards not only the court but also the police department. And right or wrong, the release of a suspect from custody for lack of sufficient evidence, or the failure of a prosecutor to take a case to trial, or the failure of the correction system to reform a convict before parole or release, they all directly affect the public image of policing. Does that kind of make sense? And then discretion kind of falls under enforcing laws, and this is huge. The definition of discretion is the freedom of an agency or individual officer to make choices as to whether to act, freedom to act or judge on one's own. Well, discretion, that is judgment, must be exercised as to which laws to enforce. Now, each department must decide which reported crimes to actively investigate and to what degree, and which unreported crimes to seek out and to what degree. And the law doesn't set priorities, it simply defines crimes and then classifies them into things like felonies and misdemeanors, and then assesses penalties. The department sets its own priorities based on the community's needs. Usually, departments concentrate law enforcement activities on serious crimes, those that tend to pose the greatest threat to public safety or cause the greatest economic loss. So that's one function, and that was a lot. And another one would be preserve the peace. And this has always been accepted by police as an important function. Preserving the peace has been a long accepted thing to do by police and is an important function. And police have the legal authority to arrest individuals for disturbing the peace or disorderly conduct or unlawful assembly. And police are often called to intervene in non-criminal conduct, like things that include public events, crowd control, social relations like domestic disputes, doing traffic control or maintaining law and order at big public events. Police often help people solve problems that they cannot simply cope with alone. And frequently such problems, if unresolved, could in fact escalate into a crime. So this is preserving the peace thing. There's a lot of dimensions to this. So again, often called to intervene with all different kinds of issues. And then what about preventing crime? Well, this is closely related to law enforcement and peace preservation. So crime prevention, again, is closely related to law enforcement and peace prevention. And if the peace has been kept, crime has, in effect, been prevented. Now, crime prevention differs from peacekeeping and law enforcing in that it attempts to eliminate potentially dangerous or criminal situations. It's proactive. If police are highly visible in a community, crimes may be prevented. For example, a routine patrol might not only discover a crime in progress, but also prevent other crimes from being committed. But just as police officers cannot be expected to enforce all laws, we can't be expected to prevent all crimes from occurring either. So listen to a statement by an individual by the name of Clockars, and this was written in 1991. The war on crime is a war police not only cannot win, but cannot in any real sense fight. They cannot win it because it is simply not within their power to change those things, such as unemployment, the age distribution of the population, moral education, freedom, civil liberties, ambitions, and the social and economic opportunities to realize them that influence the amount of crime in any society. That's pretty interesting, you guys, when you think about that. Now, there are a lot of things that we can do, don't get me wrong, but this was very profound because it shows you what law enforcement is really up against in its biggest form. Okay, moving on to the next one. Protecting civil rights and civil liberties. Not only are we charged with enforcing laws, but also we are expected to do so by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And you can look at that first line in the Code of Ethics. So not only are departments charged with enforcing laws, preserving the peace, and preventing crime, they are also expected to do so as specified by the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, the first paragraph of the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics concludes with the statement that law enforcement officers have a fundamental duty to respect the constitutional rights of all to liberty, equality, and justice. And then finally, to provide services. And well, let me go back here and finish up with the civil rights deal. let me add this in. Police officers are, in fact, independent decision makers and have both personal and positional power. Now, one of the most powerful tools officers have is that word discretion. And right or wrong, officers are guided by the seriousness of the law violation, who committed it, and the person's age, race, and social class. Now, because of the potential for discretion to appear instead as discrimination or worse, to actually constitute discrimination, it is imperative that departments hire recruits with high levels of what they call integrity and common sense to provide ongoing training as to the appropriate application of their discretionary power so as not to infringe on citizens' constitutional rights. And basically what I'm saying here, to shorten it up, is that hiring has a lot to do with this. And because we have a lot of discretion, we need to know how to properly apply and use that discretion. So now we'll go on to providing services. Well, there's a motto that you might see on some police cars, and it's the words that they might have written on the side of the car, like protect and serve, or the code of ethics. This is my fundamental duty is to serve. Well, when you're talking about providing services, and I'll just stay on this slide here, in addition to enforcing laws, preserving the peace, preventing crime, and protecting civil rights and liberties, the police are also called upon to provide additional services to their community. And this role, of course, is acknowledged in the first sentence of the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics that says, as a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve the community. And there's a lot of other things that go with this. So the types of services delivered by the police could be things like giving information or directions or advice or counseling or referring people or intervening in domestic arguments and working with neglected kids and rendering emergency aid and rescuing victims and dealing with alcoholics and people with mental illness and finding lost children and controlling traffic and crowds. And in addition, many departments have community education programs that deal with crimes, drugs, safety, gangs, and all that other stuff. Well, that falls all underneath that umbrella of what we've been talking about, serving your community. And those are other services. So I know it seems like a lot, but this really is this is where we're at, everybody. And this is modern day law enforcement. So now let's move into discretion, and then we're going to get into what an agency kind of looks like. So discretion is the freedom of an agency or individual officer to make choices as to whether to act or not. Discretion, that is judgment, must be exercised as to which laws to enforce. And we kind of touched on this. Both the department and the public must accept that not all laws can be enforced at all times. Again, we look at which cases to investigate, to arrest or not to arrest, and to use force or not. And we'll talk about that later in greater detail. So what is the easiest function for your officers to fulfill, in your opinion? What do you think? I'll let you kind of mull that over. So let's look at some goals of policing, some contemporary goals as it relates to policing. Now, police departments have implemented the community policing philosophy, forming proactive, problem-solving partnerships with the citizens they serve to create a healthy, crime-free environment. There is still a place for traditional goals of policing. However, most agencies have kind of two goals now. They have, the traditional, hook 'em and book 'em and get out there and fight crime and what have you, but they also have the community policing aspect that is added into this entire relationship. And to define community policing, it is a philosophy that emphasizes a problem-solving partnership between the police and the citizens in working toward a healthy, crime-free environment. And it can also be called neighborhood policing. So goals resulted from implementing community policing usually include, again, forming partnerships with the community and then a proactive problem-solving approach to crime, fear of crime, and crime prevention. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So again, as you look at community policing, here's the definition again: a philosophy that emphasizes a problem-solving partnership between the police and the citizens in working toward that healthy, crime-free environment. So now we're going to talk more about the organization of the department, kind of like the structure. The nation's police departments vary from small, informally organized departments with a few employees to highly organized metropolitan police departments with many employees, thousands of employees, with many subdivisions and different types of units. The specific organization of a police department is influenced by the department's size and location and the extent and type of crime that it deals with. And when you become a supervisor or a manager, this might make a little bit more sense. We have this phrase out there called span of control, and this describes the number of individuals or resources that one person can manage effectively during any type of emergency or special event. So span of control, again, the number of individuals or resources one supervisor can manage effectively during an emergency response or some type of special event. And kind of going a little bit back for a second, because I just kind of remembered something. When we're talking about the fact that a department can be influenced by its size, location, and type of crime, an example for that, just to give it to you, would be small departments can often combine like patrol and traffic or community services into maybe one single division, but a large department might have all of those divisions separately. They'll have a separate traffic division and a separate community services division and a separate patrol division, etc. So hopefully that kind of clears that up. And so now back to kind of where we were before. And many departments are moving away. Well, let me go back. Whatever an agency's size, okay, the police organization seeks strict accountability through a clear rank structure, military symbols, and procedures, and a rigid communication or hierarchy, if you will, and close supervision. Now, the chief of police usually oversees the operations of the entire department, and under the chief, depending upon the size of the department, are going to be other individuals. And as we think of this span of control and how you structure your department, we look at a couple of different things. One thing is we look at internal obligations. That would be the running of the organization itself, those things kind of inside. And then we look at external obligations, the concerns with the organization's environment, those things outside of the department. And we also look at other outside influences and what maybe the community wants from us as it relates to what type of a department we have. Now, I talked a minute ago about the span of control and that hierarchy of, let's say, a police department. And here you can look, you can see the chief at the top is the top management, and some departments are different, but you have like middle management could be captains and lieutenants, and then first line supervisors would be sergeants, and then line staff would be officers and support personnel. And when you organize these departments, typically, again, many departments are moving away from the tall hierarchy to a more flattened structure with fewer officers in supervisory positions and more in the patrol division, and putting an emphasis on teamwork rather than on strict obedience to kind of a higher authority. And then again, remember, whenever we talk about span of control, law enforcement administrators have kind of two obligations. They have that internal one, which is the concern with running the organization, like staffing and things like that. They have the external obligation, which is dealing with the organization's environment. Those important outside forces that affect an agency, like politicians and the media and prosecutors and judges and things like that. So to meet these obligations, the police chief must coordinate the efforts of two primary groups. And this is typically how a lot of departments are broken down. They're broken down into what we call the field services area or operational services, depending upon where you come from. So these are two basic units, and the administrative services area. So when you look at this diagram here, you can see the chief is here. Now it depends on your size of the department. It can look different, of course. You might have a chief and then, a couple of captains, or a captain could be over this, but this is very, very generic. But usually most departments have two big divisions: field services, which could be patrol and traffic and detectives and whatever the department wants to put under there. And then you could have administrative services, which is like recruitment and training and records and dispatch and IT or technical services or things like that. So let's make sure that we got that. So administrative services, we went over that: recruiting, training, research planning, field services, operational, line divisions, patrol officers, etc. And under administrative services, and sometimes they're different. You'll see these things depending upon the hierarchy of the department. One thing that you'll see here could be under a different side. Communications, enhanced 911 requires wireless carriers to identify the location of a caller within a certain degree of accuracy. And communications is really important. You have the text to 911, and you guessed it, you can now text in your stuff. Is this good or bad? Dude, I don't know. I'm not really sure how great it's gonna be, but okay. You have pinging, which is a tool used to locate the source of a call a person is making on a cell phone. And is this a good thing? Well, it can be if you're looking to locate lost folks or suspects or other things. Reverse 911 allows agencies to basically alert, that's what that word should be, the public in emergencies, where we can kind of send out a message back to everybody and let them know something is going on. The bigger parts of field services, about 60 to 70% of a department's force is assigned to that patrol function. Traffic, well, this could be a patrol function or it could be a separate unit, and their job, of course, is to enforce the traffic laws. Investigations, those are those individuals who are assigned to follow up and investigate cases and crimes. And community service would be those that deal strictly with community relations, and those assigned to handle community events and similar. And then you have a lot of other specialized units that are thrown in there, and we'll talk about some of these, I believe, in depth a little bit later, but I want to make sure we can get through this. So you have specialized officers that work SWAT, which is the Special Weapons and Tactics Team, for those high profile events, and the SWAT team picture is at the bottom there. Canines, where we use dogs to locate missing persons or track suspects or find guns or drugs or things like that. Professional standards would be that unit that polices the police. These are the individuals that make sure that we're following proper policy and procedure. Vice and narcotics, these groups of individuals deal with things like gambling, prostitution, and all sorts of narcotics enforcement. And then juvenile investigations, well, those are individuals that investigate all types of juvenile crime. So if you have to organize a police department, what changes might you make to the basic organization of a department. And now we're going to talk a little bit about police culture. And we kind of, again, ran through a lot of these things pretty quickly, but I'm going to need you to obviously go back and take a look at some other stuff. But within police departments, whether urban, suburban, or rural, or anything, an organizational culture is likely to exist. And an organizational culture refers to any group demonstrating specific patterns of behavior that distinguish it from others within a society. And you have to kind of think about that. Where does it come from? Well, organizational culture is derived from customs and rituals and values of the organization and the organization's history and how the organization's members interact with one another and with those outside of the organization. And policing has been identified as having an organizational culture, commonly referred to the Blue Brotherhood, or this thin blue line phrase that you'll hear. Now, police officers work nights and weekends, deal with highly confidential material that can't be shared with friends. They must enforce the law impartially, even when a friend or relative violates the law, and frequently face public hostility, abuse, name-calling, and bias reporting from the media. In addition to that, they're faced with a lot of challenges out there in the world. Now, additionally, a bonding feature is not commonly found in other professions, is the willingness and readiness of officers to risk their lives for each other. So this is something that you don't find in other professions, if you will, maybe other than the military, but you find it in law enforcement. And a combination of these factors largely accounts for the existence of that police culture. And another phrase used to describe that police culture, what I told you a minute ago, is that thin blue line, a metaphor that places police officers, the blue, as the element that separates an orderly, lawful society from one of chaos and crime. And the fact that the citizenry greatly outnumber those serving in blue is why this particular line is thin. And this symbol of that police culture, a black flag, separated across the middle by a thin blue line. So you can kind of see how that culture may develop. And here's the line that I'm actually talking about. So, individuals who become police officers commonly lose their non-police friends within a few years, and in addition to working different hours, they may make some of their friends uneasy, especially those who might drink and drive or might speed or engage in any type of law-breaking behavior. And in addition to that, to losing their non-police friends, officers may also come to realize that they're now part of a group that's kind of isolated a bit from the rest of society. And a fellowship kind of forms, united by risk and hardship and fear. And although officers are highly visible, they are in fact kind of set apart. They may be feared, disliked, hated, or sometimes even assaulted. Because of that, sometimes, and not all the time, I'm just giving you the info, because of this, sometimes they keep close ranks for protection and security, and the closer they become, the more that citizens kind of fear and just distrust them, basically. And when that happens, it leads to even more tighter ranks within law enforcement, and so that cycle kind of goes on, and the police become the in group, and everybody else kind of becomes the outside group. And we're trying to deal with that. in law enforcement. So I don't want you to think it's all bad, but that's the emphasis of the story of the thin blue line. So, do you think that this might have something to do with police culture, this thin blue line? We talked about it as the metaphor that places the officers as the element of order, and society, chaos, and crime is kind of that one on the outside. So what are some styles of policing? And we've talked a little bit about that, and we're going to talk about just a couple more things, and then we're going to wrap up. So styles of policing that are out there. And the organizational culture of a department or agency directly affects the styles of police work within it. And varieties of police behavior. A classic study published in 1978 by James Q. Wilson describes three distinct styles of policing: the legalistic, the watchman, and the service style. And many studies since then have looked at styles of policing and have classified these styles into kind of clusters called typologies. And common typologies identified include the enforcer, the crime fighter or the zealot, the social service agent, and the watchdog. And let's kind of take a really quick look at these. So the enforcer focuses on social order and keeping society safe. Well, the crime fighter focuses on keeping society safe and treats all laws and offenders equally, unable to see the gray areas associated with policing. The social service agent is quite a bit more accepting of that social service role, and the watchdog is kind of just interested in maintaining the status quo. Well, now, new recommendations by the President's Task Force on the 21st Century Policing, however, have called for a change in the law enforcement culture toward a policing style that embraces guardian rather than a warrior mentality. And this necessitates a change in not only organizational policy, but more important, you can see it's going to necessitate a change in what? in organizational culture. Excuse me. So we're going to have to try to build that in. And that's where this term procedural justice comes in. And this refers to the idea of being treated fairly during a process or a procedure. Now, a positive process experience outweighs a positive outcome. And an example could be someone who receives a ticket will regard the system favorably if he or she thinks the outcome is arrived at fairly. So procedural justice refers to the idea of being treated fairly during some type of process or procedure. Now, there was some research also done on procedural justice that has revealed basically 5 critical dimensions of what they call procedural fairness. So procedural justice, we can go back and define it, the idea of being treated fairly during a process. And as part of that, they've come up with 5, basically, research has come up with 5 different things that go along with that. And the first one is voice. The perception that your side of the story has been heard. So imagine getting a traffic ticket and how bad you want to tell the officer why you did what you did, but the officer doesn't give you a chance to talk. And all you wanted to do was I just want to tell you why. It doesn't matter if I get the ticket, just let me explain it. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? The next one is respect. The perception that the system players treat you with dignity and respect, where we don't maybe use profanity, or we give you the respect that you deserve while we're investigating a crime or giving you a traffic ticket or whatever the situation might be. Neutrality, the perception that decision-making or that decision-making process was unbiased. and trustworthy. Understanding, the comprehension of the process, and then helpfulness. Perception that the system players are interested in your personal situation. So overall, we can say that procedural justice facilitates positive police contacts, which in turn builds public trust and enhances police legitimacy. And along with that, we're going to talk about image. And I promised my niece that I would throw in some picture of Lego people or Lego cops because she totally loves Legos. So I wanted to make sure that I got this in here. So each police officer is an individual, and we know this. And police officers are fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, uncles, aunts, coaches of Little League, church members, neighbors, and everything else. And as people, they like to be liked, but often their profession requires that they take negative action against those who break the law. And as a result, they're often criticized for simply doing their job. Now, although police officers are individuals just like those in the community, they have sworn to protect and serve. And their behavior is very public. And it may simply be that they are extraordinarily visible, ordinary people. So therefore, the public's image of the police varies greatly, and some see police officers as protectors, and others see them as militaristic harassers. And the sight of a police officer arouses feelings of a lot of different feelings. Could be respect or confidence or security, but it also could be fear, hostility, hatred, or indifference. And that word image is defined as how one is viewed, the concept of someone or something held by the public. And police image results from the media's portrayal of the police and from everyday contacts between individuals and police officers, and of course many community members. And many in law enforcement are critical of the skewed portrayal of the police by the news media, contending that stories showing police in a negative light far outnumber the positive press. Now, despite what is written in books or portrayed on television and in movies, the abstraction called the police image is primarily the result of those day-to-day contacts between police and citizens. So, are there some stereotypes out there? Sure. Are there factors that influence the police image? Sure. How about the nature of their job? The job demands a lot, and many demands are placed on officers, and they're under constant pressure and faced with rapidly changing conditions, sometimes life-threatening situations with sometimes very few guidelines and little supervision and very, very little time and information needed to make those split-second decisions. The image resulting from the nature of police work might easily be compared to the image of a football referee. It is readily accepted that the referees are necessary for the game because without them, chaos would reign. But despite their importance, however, their image is often negative because no matter what call they make, a lot of people don't like the call. And actually, that's a pretty good analogy with law enforcement. But what about stereotypes? And there are some stereotypes out there. Cops are viewed sometimes as suspicious or cynical or indifferent or authoritarian or bigoted or sometimes even brutal. And I'm going to have you look up those definitions, and we're just about done. So what about satisfaction? And we're going to end with that, and confidence in the police. And there's been a lot of studies, and here is a study that was done on how much confidence do you have in the police. And I believe this was a Pew Research study, and you can get a lot of different studies from this particular website. I don't think I put the link in here. But the police image is shaped by the confidence level the public has in the ability of the police to fulfill their civic duties. Now, 5 studies funded by the NIJ, which is the National Institute of Justice, explored factors that influence public satisfaction with the police and revealed that although satisfaction levels were generally high, they were in fact unevenly distributed. Now, satisfaction was found to be shaped by demographic variables, neighborhood crime condition, and experiences with the police, whether firsthand or indirect. Now, race was not found to directly determine satisfaction level. Rather, race correlated with other demographic variables, neighborhood crime rates, and experiences with police to produce an indirect influence on the level of satisfaction with police. And I know that's kind of a lot of information, but if you look at this chart on the slide right here, which is labeled figure 4.4, you can see community members' confidence in their police departments. And again, this is just one study out of many. And you can look at it at the top right here by race. You can talk about excessive force on suspects. Are people treated the same? All the way down to the bottom. So do you agree that race and gender composition of the force affect the satisfaction with the police? Well, it's just a question that we're going to kind of ask ourselves. So I know I went through a lot of that quick, but I wanted to make the 60-minute deadline, and I think I just went over it just a tad, but that's okay. But this will conclude our Chapter 4 lecture for this evening. If you have any questions, please post them on the general discussion board, and if you don't want to post them there, again, you can email me. And again, as a final reminder, don't forget to look at those terms and definitions at the front of each one of the chapters, along with the questions, the discussion questions that are at the end of the chapter, and make sure, please, that you are reading your chapters in your textbook to help add some context to a lot of the things that we're going over, because there really is quite a bit of information to cover. So with that being said, that will conclude this evening, and until next time.